What if the deadliest soldier in World War I wasn't fighting for his country but for a people that country had already erased? In 1917, German soldiers began reporting something impossible. Sentries vanished without gunfire. Patrols disappeared without footprints. Bodies reappeared miles away, like the war itself had grown teeth. They called it the ghost of the trenches. But the Americans who fought beside him knew the truth. He wasn't a ghost. He was an Apache. And this was never his war. What would become of you if your ancestral land was seized, your heritage erased, and the only path to proving your worth lay in fighting a war that was never truly yours? Imagine the battlefield not as the familiar desert canyons of your home, but as the frigid, blood-soaked trenches of a distant continent, where death whispered in foreign tongues. Before proceeding, please share your location in the comments. And if this narrative resonates with you, if it stirs deep emotions, I urge you to subscribe. This channel relies on your support to continue bringing these buried stories to light. In the desolate, muddy landscape of northeastern France, autumn 1917, German soldiers began to report phenomena their commanders refused to credit. Sentries vanished from their posts without a sound, not by artillery or machine gun fire, but simply gone. Their bodies would surface days, sometimes weeks later, in tactically illogical locations. Deep behind Allied lines, hanging from trees in untouched forests, or floating face down in rivers stained red with more than mud. The report spoke of a shadow moving through no man's land, as if barbed wire, craters, and poison gas were mere trifles in a vast hunting ground. They described a figure who adorned his face with the ash of the fallen and wielded a blade that shimmered like moonlight on water. They named him Der Geist, the ghost. They called him Der Teufel des Grabens, the devil of the trenches. Yet, the American soldiers who fought alongside him knew his true identity. Joseph Greywolf, the last of the Apache scouts. Joseph Greywolf's saga begins not in France, but on the sun-baked red earth of the San Carlos Reservation in Arizona Territory, in 1891. He was born amidst a thunderstorm so fierce that elders claimed the sky itself was at war. His mother, Itsachu, meaning great hawk in the Chiricahua tongue, perished bringing him into the world. His father, a man who had once ridden with Geronimo during the Apache's final, desperate resistance, raised the boy alone in a meager wooden shack the Bureau of Indian Affairs deemed adequate for their kind. From the moment Joseph could walk, his father imparted the ancient ways. Not the diluted versions forced upon Apache children in reservation schools, but the authentic paths. The ways of the hunt, the ways of stealth, the ways of war. By age 7, Joseph could track a rabbit across barren rock. By 10, he moved through a forest without disturbing a single leaf. By 14, he had slain his first mountain lion armed only with a knife his father had forged from the blade of a cavalry saber, a weapon that once belonged to the very soldiers who had confined their people to the reservation. The reservation was a prison without walls. The Apache, once the most feared warriors in the American Southwest, were reduced to subsistence farmers on land barely capable of sustaining weeds. Children were sent to boarding schools where they were forbidden their language, their ceremonies, forbidden to be anything other than what the government dictated. Joseph endured 3 years in one such school. He learned English, mathematics, and the history of a nation that had sought to exterminate his people. Yet, each night, after lights out in the dormitory, he would slip through an unchecked window and practice his father's teachings in the darkness of the Arizona desert. In 1906, Joseph's father succumbed to tuberculosis, a disease that ravaged reservations, fueled by malnutrition and despair. But Joseph knew the deeper truth. His father died of a broken heart. He had witnessed everything he cherished, everything he had fought for, everything that defined him as Apache, meticulously stripped away until only a hollow shell awaited death. Joseph was 15 when he buried his father in a secret mountain location, unknown to the government, a place where the old ceremonies could still be performed. He sang the death songs his father had taught him, painted his face with sacred colors, and made a solemn vow. He would carry the spirit of his people wherever he went. He would prove that the Apache were not a defeated race, not a broken people fading into history. He would show the world that the blood of warriors still coursed through their veins. For the next 11 years, Joseph wandered. He worked as a ranch hand in Texas, a railroad laborer in New Mexico, a hunting guide in Colorado. He accepted any available job, saved what money he could, and waited. He didn't know for what, but an instinct beyond reason told him his moment would arrive. That moment dawned on April 6, 1917, when the United States declared war on Germany. Within weeks, recruitment offices nationwide were inundated with young men eager to fight. Posters adorned every street corner, depicting Uncle Sam pointing, demanding patriotic duty. Newspapers sensationalized German atrocities, slaughtered civilians, cities in ruins. They called it the war to end all wars, the war to make the world safe for democracy. Joseph read those papers, saw those posters, and felt an unfamiliar stirring within him since his father's death. Here was a chance to prove himself. Here was a battlefield where his skills would be invaluable. Here was an opportunity to showcase the prowess of an Apache warrior. He entered the recruitment office in Albuquerque one scorching May morning. The sergeant behind the desk regarded him with a mix of curiosity and disdain. Joseph was 26, lean as a coyote, with black hair cascading past his shoulders and eyes that seemed to perceive beyond the ordinary. "What are you?" the sergeant demanded. "Mexican." Joseph shook his head. "Apache," he stated. The sergeant laughed. "We don't take Indians," he scoffed. "Go back to your reservation." Joseph remained motionless, staring at the sergeant with those unnerving eyes until the man's laughter died. "You will take me," Joseph declared. "And you will be glad you did." No official record details the ensuing events in that recruitment office. Official documents merely state that Joseph Graywolf, listed as a laborer residing in San Carlos, Arizona, was inducted into the United States Army on May 19, 1917. He was assigned to the 3rd Infantry Division and shipped to Camp Dix in New Jersey for basic training. The training camps were a revelation. Joseph had dedicated his life to silent movement, shadow strikes, and precise, efficient killing. The Army, it seemed, desired something entirely different. They sought men who marched in straight lines, fired rifles in unison, and charged across open ground into machine gun fire without flinching. They wanted men who would die obediently. Joseph complied. He marched, shot, and followed orders with such mechanical precision that his drill instructors began to suspect mockery. But at night, while other recruits slept off their exhaustion, Joseph would slip from the barracks and vanish into the surrounding forests. He would hunt, track, and practice the ancient ways, sharpening his skills for the battlefield awaiting him. It was during one of these nocturnal forays that Joseph first drew the attention of Captain Marcus Whitfield of the Army Intelligence Division. Whitfield, a Yale-educated officer from a wealthy Connecticut family, studied military history with the fervor of a theologian. He had read accounts of the Apache Wars, the decades-long struggle between the U.S. cavalry and Southwest warriors. He knew the Apache had never been truly defeated in battle, only surrendered when their families faced starvation, their children died, and their way of life was systematically destroyed by overwhelming forces. Whitfield discovered Joseph in a clearing 3 miles from camp, performing a series of exercises that blended combat training with religious ritual. The captain observed from the shadows for nearly an hour, mesmerized. When Joseph finally paused, Whitfield stepped forward and introduced himself. "I have been reading about your people," Whitfield began. "The Apache scouts, the warriors who could track a man across 100 miles of desert, the fighters who terrified the entire southwestern frontier for 30 years. Joseph remained silent, watching the captain with dark, unreadable eyes. "The war in Europe," Whitfield continued, "is unlike anything we've seen. Trenches stretch from the English Channel to the Swiss border. Millions of men face each other across a few hundred yards of mud and wire. Neither side can advance. Neither side can retreat. It is a stalemate, consuming a generation." Joseph still did not speak. "But there are missions," Whitfield said, lowering his voice, "missions requiring a different kind of soldier. Reconnaissance behind enemy lines. Silent elimination of key targets. Work beyond men who only know how to march and shoot. Work demanding the skills you practice out here every night." Thus, Joseph Graywolf became a member of the newly formed Special Operations Group, a unit so clandestine its existence wouldn't be acknowledged by the War Department for another 70 years. The group comprised 12 men handpicked by Captain Whitfield from across the American Expeditionary Forces. There were sharpshooters from the Tennessee mountains, trappers from Minnesota's forests, hunters from Louisiana's swamps, men skilled in wilderness survival, stealth, and silent killing. But even among these exceptional individuals, Joseph was distinct. During the group's training exercises in the English countryside, he exhibited abilities that defied explanation. He could traverse a field of dry leaves without a whisper. He could remain motionless for hours, invisible even to observers who knew his exact location. He could sense other humans from seemingly impossible distances, as if possessing a sixth sense civilization had bred out of the rest. The other group members were initially wary, having grown up with tales of savage frontier Indians, scalping, torture, and unspeakable rituals. But as weeks of training passed, their wariness evolved into respect, then into something akin to awe. Joseph never boasted or complained. He simply executed tasks with a quiet efficiency that made the others feel like clumsy amateurs. It was Private Thomas Birdsong, a Choctaw from Oklahoma, also recruited for the unit, who first encouraged Joseph to speak of his past. The two Native Americans formed a bond transcending tribal rivalries, forged in the shared experience of being outsiders in a white man's army, fighting a white man's war. "My father used to tell me stories," Joseph recounted one night as they cleaned weapons in the dim light of their barn barracks. Stories about the old days, before the reservations. He said an Apache warrior wasn't just a fighter. He was a guardian, a protector. He fought not out of love for killing, but out of love for his people. Every enemy defeated was a threat removed. Every battle won was another day of safety for his family. Thomas nodded. "My grandfather said something similar," he replied. "He said a true warrior fights for life, not for death. That the greatest victory is one where no blood is spilled at all." Joseph was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "I don't know if I believe that anymore. I've seen what the white man does to those who won't fight. I've seen my people broken and scattered like leaves in the wind. Sometimes I think the only language this world understands is violence. The only argument it respects is force." In September 1917, the Special Operations Group deployed to France. They crossed the Atlantic on the USS Henderson, packed in the hold with 2,000 other soldiers, breathing air thick with sweat, fear, and diesel fumes. Joseph spent most of the voyage on deck, gazing at the gray expanse of the ocean, vigilant for German submarines that hunted like wolves tracking wounded elk. The ship docked at St. Nazaire on a morning when rain fell so heavily it seemed the sky itself wept. The soldiers disembarked into a nightmare landscape. Streets teemed with ambulances carrying the wounded, trucks hauling ammunition and supplies, columns of men marching towards a front line that consumed them like a furnace consumes coal. Captain Whitfield gathered his unit in a warehouse near the docks and briefed them on their first mission. German intelligence had established a listening post in a ruined village about 15 miles behind the front lines. The post was intercepting Allied communications, feeding information to German artillery that was decimating the trenches. Conventional forces had attempted to assault the position twice, both ending in disaster. Now it was the Special Operations Group's turn. The unit set out that night, moving through a landscape transformed by 3 years of industrialized warfare. Forests were reduced to fields of shattered stumps. Villages were mere rubble piles. Roads were rivers of mud churned by countless men and machines. And everywhere, was the smell. Cordite and rotting flesh, poison gas and burning wood, death in all its forms. Joseph led the way, moving through the darkness with a supernatural certainty, guided by instincts honed over generations. The other unit members followed in his literal footsteps, trusting him to navigate the maze of craters, wire, and unexploded shells. They reached the ruined village's outskirts just before dawn. Joseph signaled a halt and vanished into the shadows to reconnoiter. He was gone for 3 hours. Upon his return, he presented a complete map of the German position sketched in the mud, detailing every sentry, machine gun nest, and communication trench. The assault commenced at midnight. Joseph went in first, alone, while the rest of the unit provided covering fire. He moved through the German defenses like smoke through a keyhole, silent and insubstantial. The first sentry died without realizing his peril. The second turned his head toward the sound of his falling comrade, but Joseph's blade was already at his throat. In 23 minutes, Joseph Greywolf eliminated 11 German soldiers. He used no rifle, no grenades. Only the knife his father had given him, forged from a cavalry saber, bearing the weight of generations of Apache warriors. When the rest of the unit moved in to secure the listening post, they found him standing amidst the ruins, his face painted with ash and blood, his eyes reflecting the distant artillery flashes like a wolf's caught in firelight. Word of the incident spread through American lines like wildfire. Officers tried to suppress the stories, fearing their impact on morale, but they were unstoppable. Soldiers whispered about the Indian who could walk through walls, kill silently, and had brought frontier terror to French trenches. German soldiers also heard these whispers, or perhaps simply observed the results of Joseph's work and drew their own conclusions. Either way, within weeks of his arrival at the front, the legend of Der Geist was born. Captain Whitfield began receiving requests from commanders across the line. A German sniper terrorizing a sector near Verdun. Could the ghost deal with him? An enemy observation post surviving 3 artillery barrages. Could the ghost eliminate it? A German colonel organizing a counteroffensive. Could the ghost make him disappear? Joseph accepted every mission. He moved through no man's land as if it were the Arizona desert, craters as canyons, trenches as arroyos, enemy soldiers as mere prey to be stalked and killed. He preferred solitude but sometimes took Thomas Birdsong with him. The 2 Native Americans communicated through hand signals and whispered words no one else understood. The missions grew more dangerous. The Germans, realizing they faced something unprecedented, began setting traps. They posted double sentries, strung tripwires connected to flares, and trained dogs to patrol the perimeter. None of it mattered. Joseph adapted to each new obstacle with his characteristic calm efficiency. When Germans used dogs, he masked his scent with mud and rotting vegetation. When they used flares, he froze in place, becoming another shadow among shadows. When they doubled sentries, he simply killed them twice as fast. But the war was transforming Joseph in ways he didn't fully comprehend. The nightly raids, the constant killing, the endless parade of dead faces, it all took its toll. He began to have recurring dreams. Of the Arizona desert, of the mountains where his father was buried, of the old life stolen from him. He would awaken in the darkness of his dugout, heart pounding, hand reaching for the knife never far from his side. In one persistent dream, he was a child again, at his father's feet, listening to old stories. His father spoke of the Gone, the mountain spirits who protected the Apache. The Gone were warriors, his father said, fighting chaos and destruction, but also healers, teaching balance with the world, taking only what was needed, giving back more than was taken. When Joseph awoke from these dreams, he felt a profound sense of loss. He had become a warrior, yes, proven himself in battle, earned respect and fear. But what was he fighting for? Not for his people, still imprisoned on reservations. Not for his country, which had tried to destroy all he loved. Not even for himself, because the person he had been before the war now felt like a stranger he barely remembered. It was Thomas who finally confronted him. They sat in a shell crater one night, awaiting the signal for another raid. "You're losing yourself, brother," Thomas said. "I see it in your eyes." Joseph was silent for a long time. Then he said, "I don't know who I am anymore. In the desert, I was Apache. In the army, I was a soldier. But here, in this place, I am something else. Something that has no name." Thomas nodded. "My grandfather warned me about this. He called it the Shadow Road. He said warriors who walk too long in the darkness sometimes forget how to find their way back to the light." "Is there a way back?" Joseph asked. Thomas paused. "My grandfather believed there was. He said the spirits never abandon us, even when we abandon ourselves. He said if we listen carefully enough, we can still hear their voices calling us home." The signal came before Joseph could respond, a single white flare arcing into the sky, painting the landscape in ghostly light. The 2 men rose from their crater and moved toward the German lines, 2 shadows among shadows, 2 warriors walking the razor's edge between life and death. That night, something occurred that would forever haunt Joseph. The mission was a simple reconnaissance, a quick assessment of German positions for a larger offensive. But upon reaching the enemy trenches, Joseph and Thomas discovered an unexpected field hospital. Dozens of wounded German soldiers lay on stretchers, attended by nurses and orderlies armed only with bandages, morphine, and desperate hope. Joseph stopped at the trench's edge, knife in hand, and surveyed the scene. The wounded cried out in German, words he couldn't understand, but their meaning was universal. They called for their mothers, begged for water, prayed to a God who seemed to have forsaken this corner of the world. "We should go," Thomas whispered. "This isn't our mission." But Joseph remained frozen, staring at the wounded men, his enemies, who had tried to kill him for months, who would try again if they recovered. He realized with piercing clarity, cutting through all his confusion and doubt, that they were just like him. They were warriors sent to fight a war they didn't start, for reasons they didn't fully grasp. They were sons, brothers, fathers who yearned only to go home. He sheathed his knife, turned from the trench, and began walking back toward American lines, Thomas close behind. Captain Whitfield awaited their return, his face grim, eyes cold. "You disobeyed orders," he stated. The reconnaissance was not completed. Joseph met his gaze unflinchingly. "There was a hospital," he said. "Wounded men. I will not kill wounded men." Whitfield stared for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. "Good," he said. "I was beginning to wonder if anything was left of the men beneath the warrior. Now I know there is." The captain produced a flask and offered it to Joseph. "The Indians called them the shadow walkers," he said, "warriors who could move between the worlds of the living and the dead. My research suggested they believed these warriors had a sacred duty not just to kill, but to decide who deserved to die and who deserved to live. I wanted to know if you remembered that duty." Joseph took the flask but didn't drink. He looked at the captain with new eyes. "You knew," he said. "You knew about the hospital." Whitfield nodded. "It was a test," he admitted, "perhaps an unfair one. But I needed to know what kind of men I was sending into the darkness. Now I know that you are the kind of men who can find his way back to the light." That conversation marked Joseph's turning point. He continued missions, killed when necessary, but something within him had shifted. He began to view the war not as a hunting ground to prove his worth, but as a tragedy consuming millions of lives on both sides. He began to understand that his skills, taught by his father, passed down through generations of Apache warriors, were not meant to serve industrial slaughter. They were meant to protect, to defend, to preserve life, not to destroy it. Yet the war continued. Artillery thundered. Gas drifted across trenches. Bodies piled in no man's land, rotting under the sun, sinking into the mud, becoming part of the landscape of death stretching to the horizon. In spring 1918, the Germans launched their final great offensive, Kaiserschlacht, the Kaiser's Battle, the largest military operation the world had ever seen. Over 1 million German soldiers attacked along a front exceeding 50 miles, smashing through Allied lines, advancing further in weeks than either side had in 3 years of fighting. The Special Operations Group was flung into the chaos, tasked with slowing the German advance by any means. Joseph led mission after mission, striking communication lines, eliminating officers, sowing confusion behind enemy lines. He slept no more than 2 or 3 hours a night, ate when he could, drank when he could, killed when he had to, and still the Germans advanced relentlessly. It was during this desperate period that Joseph performed the feat that solidified his legend. The Germans had captured a strategic crossroads about 20 miles behind the Allied front, a junction controlling the flow of supplies and reinforcements to the entire sector. If it remained in enemy hands, an Allied counteroffensive would be impossible. If it could be retaken, the tide might turn. A full division was assembling to assault the position, but the attack wouldn't be ready for another 48 hours. Meanwhile, someone needed to hold the Germans in place, prevent them from reinforcing or fortifying, and convince them they faced a much larger force. Captain Whitfield summoned Joseph to his dugout and explained the situation. "I need you to go to that crossroads," he said. "I need you to keep them busy for 2 days. I know what I'm asking. I know it may be impossible, but you are the only one who might be able to do it." Joseph looked at the map, at the small X marking the crossroads, at the lines and arrows representing thousands of men and millions of bullets. Then he looked up at the captain and said, "I will need supplies, ammunition, explosives, and I will need to go alone." The captain began to argue, but Joseph cut him off. "If I take others, they will die," he said. "This is not a mission for soldiers. This is a hunt, and I am the only hunter who can survive it." He set out that night, carrying everything he could on his back, moving through the shattered landscape like a ghost. Upon reaching the crossroads outskirts, he spent 6 hours observing German positions, memorizing patterns, identifying weaknesses. Then he began his work. For the next 47 hours, Joseph Greywolf waged a one-man war against an entire German regiment. He struck from the darkness, killing sentries, destroying ammunition dumps, cutting communication wires. He set booby traps that exploded without warning, creating panic among troops who couldn't see their attacker. He started fires that forced Germans to divert men from positions to fight flames. He moved so swiftly and struck from so many directions that the German commander became convinced he faced an entire battalion of American raiders. The Germans sent patrols to hunt him down, none returned. They set ambushes along every possible approach. Joseph walked through them as if they didn't exist. They brought in dogs, and he killed the dogs. They brought in their best sharpshooters, and he killed the sharpshooters. They brought in reinforcements, and he killed them too. By the time the American division arrived to assault the crossroads, the German regiment was in disarray. Their commander had been shot through the head in what he believed was a secure bunker. Communications were in shambles. Ammunition ran low, and morale had been shattered by the relentless, invisible attacks plaguing them for 2 days. The assault was a success. The crossroads was retaken with minimal casualties, and Joseph Greywolf, the Apache scout who had held an entire regiment at bay with only his knife, rifle, and his father's teachings, walked out of the battlefield as the sun rose over the devastated landscape. He hadn't slept in 50 hours. He had killed more men than he could count, and he felt nothing. No triumph, no relief, no pride, only a vast emptiness, a hollow space where something important once resided. Thomas found him sitting on a pile of rubble at the crossroads edge, staring blankly. "Brother," Thomas said, kneeling beside him. "Are you all right?" Joseph turned to look at him, and Thomas saw something in his eyes he had never witnessed before. It wasn't madness. It wasn't despair. It was something worse. Understanding. "I know now why my father died," Joseph said. "He died because he saw what I am seeing. He saw that there is no end to this, no victory that can wash away the blood, no peace that can bring back the dead. He saw that the world is broken, and that we are just fragments cutting each other as we fall." Thomas didn't know what to say. He sat beside his friend amidst the crossroads ruins, watching smoke rise from the battlefield, listening to the distant, ceaseless thunder of artillery. And somewhere in the distance, a church bell began to toll.